Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd, certified financial planner practitioner and founder of Asset Management Resources, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. We call it Something More because we like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients across the country, your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm Chris Boyd, certified financial planner practitioner, and I'm joined here with Jeff Perry. We are both advisory representatives with Asset Management Resources. So thanks for being with us, and thanks for the opportunity to chat with you about all your financial needs and issues. Before we jump in, just wanted to mention Happy Halloween. There'll be the show before our Halloween coming up.
It's sneaking up on us, right?
I know, coming up fast. Well, in any case, Jeff, we got a lot to talk about. I won't kill time with that kind of thing, but we want to talk a little bit about planning for retirement, and some of the things when it comes in retirement, some of the ways people think about planning for their cash flow.
Absolutely.
I'll pass it to you and we'll jump in.
You know, one of the most common things, and people frame it differently, but one of the most common things is people want to know their numbers, right? They want to know, how much money do I need? Which what they're really asking is, how much of a nest egg or income sources, you know, whether it be Social Security or pension or whatever they have accumulated through their lives, or maybe just a 401k or IRAs. How much money do I need to generate income? And when we think about income, people usually think about it in a monthly or annual, quarterly, like I need X dollars a year to live the lifestyle that I want to live in retirement, and, you know, to live comfortably. That's the goal, right? And a lot of people have heard about this rule from, I think it was 1990, that a study came out and said, if you're 65 years old, if you're a couple, 65 years old, and you have a 50-50 portfolio, meaning 50% stock focused, 50% treasury focused,
yeah,
that you can take 4% of your nest egg out of that investment allocation, and that money should last for 30 years, right? And you can adjust it for inflation, meaning, I don't know, I guess we can have a side conversation about, do you do that when inflation was 9% earlier last year?
Or an average rate, or do you do it every year?
Right. But you
do
make
you
it
discount it when you get a year when there's negative inflation? Or
if you're looking at the strict rules, right, of that 1990 study, yes, you do. You adjust it for the annual inflation rate, or you reduce it if you had a deflationary period of time, and that the money would last 30 years. So if you're 65 years old, you have that 50-50 portfolio, you make it to age 90, and basically it means you'll be out of money in 30 years, right? It should last you 30 years.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is paying, you're using principal over this,
That's right.
game plan, the 4% rule.
And historically, you see, if someone Googles the 4% rule and wants to read everything about it, they're going to spend a lot of time, because there's been a lot of commentary on the rule. But generally, the commentary on the rule is that, yes, it will work in ups and downs of the markets.
It's a good rule of thumb, at least, as a framework for people to think in terms of, how do I determine what's the right amount to be dealing with, to say, how much do I want to spend, and divide that by, your 4% or whatever, to come up with your amount of principal you need to preserve, or more, right?
That's
now,
right.
You said this article was suggesting that people could spend a little more than 4%.
Yeah, that's what got my attention this week. It was an article on Market Watch, which is a pretty well read website, and it says it's an opinion piece, just to be clear. The 4% rule for retirement spending is now 4.7% rule.
It's interesting. Let's talk about that. But before we do, I wanted to say, I remember hearing, maybe it was last year, a podcast where the original creator of the 4% rule was making the opposite argument, that it should be a lower rate, less than 4%, close to 3% rule.
Well, I
And
think this is the ongoing debate among financial advisors, right?
yeah. And so, I mean, part of it is people are living longer. That's one of the considerations. And you don't want to run out of money. And of course, at different ages, right? If you started in the original, if you started at 65, it was a 4% rule. But if you started at 75, it was a very different number, right? You presume
Life expectancy.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to, I'm a fan of Dave Ramsey, as you know, Dave, and our listeners know. He has kind of an opinion that it's crazy. He says invest all your money in like S&P funds and average is 10% return, so you can take 10% out a year. I mean, that's like on the extreme side, right? And then you have,
Wow.
which I don't subscribe to. I don't, just because I enjoy Dave Ramsey's show, I don't want people to assume that I agree with that. I think that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, are you in that scenario? Are you taking out the 10% in the year that it makes 10%, and are you taking out 4% in a year when it makes 4%? Are you putting money in a year when it goes down 10%? Or are you trying to just say it averages 10, so therefore I'm going to take that? That is interesting. But what's interesting is if you look at the rate of return of the S&P, for example, by decade,
Mm-hmm.
it fluctuates wildly.
Right.
So you can have if you're withdrawing over a 50-year period or something, and you're taking some kind of an average, that might be viable. But the 80s and 90s, you made far more than 10% per year. The first decade of 2000s, you really didn't make anything, right? It was,
and those early years really
could have an impact,
right?
Yeah.
If you start, let's say you need $40,000 a year in addition to your Social Security and whatever else of income that you have, and you say, okay, I have $1 million, so 4%, right?
Yeah,
will generate $40,000 in year one.
Yep.
But if year 1, 2, and 3 are negative years for the market, and you're withdrawing,
Yeah,
that outcome, that long-term outcome, the later years are less favorably projected.
Yeah.
Than if they were.
If you can plan to have all your good years first, and then your bad years, it works great.
Yeah.
So that's what
we suggest doing that, by the way.
Yeah, I encourage that.
Highly suggested. Pick the years where the market's going to go up for 5 years after your retirement.
Obviously, we don't have that control, right?
No.
So I do think
joking.
that you want some cushion. Number one, you don't want to be in that position where you have that risk of bad timing, so to speak. So reserves and things like that. We've talked about the idea of having reserves as a way to mitigate some of that risk. Wade Pfau talks about the idea of a reverse mortgage as a way to mitigate that risk. That you have a place to go when markets are bad, that you're not selling down. You can opt to draw from like a reserve account in those bad years, so that you minimize the damage of selling down. To your point.
Well, I like a topic that you've discussed many times in this context and in others, is a bucket of money that's not exposed to the market. And that, that bucket is, the amount in that is going to be dependent on your individual circumstances and your income needs. But a bucket that
is, yeah.
Right. So you get to decide if you're making a withdrawal, just for the sake of simplicity, once a month. If you're in a period of a correction or a bear market, you can choose not to withdraw your monthly amount that you need out of your equity exposure or your bond exposure, depending on the market situation at any given time, and go to your cash bucket.
Right.
And then you can replenish it if you're feeling that the market's a little frothy or ahead of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you can get a consistent level of income, which is the goal of the 4%, predictable income, but you can, with that buffer, that bucket, you can take advantage of getting a little bit more safety out of it.
There are other approaches, and it's not ones that I'm terribly well versed in, but something like guardrails and things like this, where if the market declines to a certain point, you limit what you take less. And
Well, if you can, right? I mean,
I think that's the challenge. Most people would have trouble just saying, "Oh, I won't be able to take money to spend,"
right.
and so it does, bring you back to the argument of, some advisors really feel strongly about the idea of having a guarantee of like your absolute expenses, whether it's Social Security, a pension, or some people would argue an annuity, an immediate annuity, which is like a pension, to cover your fixed expenses. And I get the argument for that. I don't generally favor it because I don't think you'll do as well.
Right.
Um,
And
but
a lot less flexibility there too.
yeah, and you may be giving up principal in the end, and none of us knows how long we have, and that's part of the challenge. On the one hand, you have a guarantee for life. On the other hand, what if you don't live a long time?
Right.
And you don't want to give up too much principal. So it's trying to find that balancing act. Different people, different dynamics can play into this, different risk sensibilities, different ages of spouses, and so forth. These are all variables that are worthy of consideration to say what's the best path. But let's come back to this notion of a 4% rule or higher. I think the risks are you can run out of money, and you want to be. I think generally when it comes to this, you'd rather be a little bit cautious in the way you approach this, so you have less likelihood of running out of money. I know everybody loves the idea of saying, "I'm going to spend my last dollar on my last day, and won't that be great?"
Yeah, I want to leave. I don't like that. I want to leave some
I'll
behind.
leave them a bill, whatever it is, that kind of my last meal or something.
No,
Um,
there are those people, but I don't think that's most people. Most
most
people
people,
want to leave some legacy.
I think that's true as well.
Hmm.
Most of the people we interact with have that preference. I mean, they might joke around, but most people
Right.
would certainly don't want to be in a position where if they live a long life and still have their faculties and their abilities, they don't want to be in a position where they are strapped and they don't
Right.
have resources.
That is not the
So
goal. Yeah.
so be cautious about this. A 4.7% that this article promotes, or opinion piece, or whatever it is. There may be some arguments for some people. You were saying that they promote a higher rate of
Yeah. Exactly.
equity exposure as a way to
So let me pose
accomplish.
that question to you. If you have an individual, let me go back. So the traditional 4% rule, which was by a study in the 1990s, but and it says 50% stock, 50% bond, 65 years old, 30 years. That's the setting, and there's a lot of research that says it's a good place to start, right?
Yeah,
As you think about it. But if you have a individual client, someone talking to you that has a tolerance for taking greater risk, meaning the volatility, the swings in the market doesn't bother them. So maybe instead of a 50%, they're willing to take a 60 or 65% exposure to stocks. They have the tolerance. They're going to sleep at night. They're okay. And they're maybe on the younger side, um, maybe they're 65, 60, and they want to take more, they need more to be able to retire. Are you opposed to considering a higher withdrawal rate if someone has the risk tolerance to get more exposure, which more exposure to the stock market typically means over the long term a greater level of return?
yeah, I concede that point. I think typically it does, but it doesn't always, right? It also means greater
Mhm.
risk of decline. I think the way we'd approach it would be more to say, let's run the projections and see what the probabilities of success are. So if we take more risk, sometimes uh, the median point might be higher, but the probabilities of success can go down
Mhm.
because you can have the potential for more of these down years causing you to erode principal type of thing.
Right.
If both are going higher, then yeah, I think that's of argument. The challenge is it really comes back to temperament. Um, I had a conversation this week with a client who's recently widowed, and we helped her with her portfolio, but because of her lack of past, her own personal experience, it was her husband who did most of the investing.
Hmm.
We scaled back the risk because her sensibilities were pretty, uncomfortable with risk. Now she knows that she should take on more risk, intellectually, but called me because her account had declined about 1% since she started a few months ago. Well, 1% is not a very significant decline, right?
Right.
So, in talking it through, we pointed out, we just hold on to these CDs. They're going to mature at a higher, price and better rates and all the rest of it. There were things we could explain, and she became more comfortable with it. And she was like, should I be taking on more risk? And I think that, intellectually, she understands she'd be better served with more risk. But emotionally, it does you no good to take on more risk if you can't stay the course.
That's right. It
And
can be harmful, actually, right?
it can be harmful because you
Yeah.
can say, oh, I can't take it. Take me out, that kind of thing. So, I'm going off on a tangent, but my point is, it really comes back to temperament as an important part of that equation. And, we like to think in terms of buckets, as you said, where we have some money that's very stable and accessible and liquid and so forth, and it can fill this void. And then maybe incremental, where there's levels of risk where, this account's going to be more next place we go. But okay, this money over here, that's long term. We're not likely to touch that for a while. Or even if we touch it, we know it's going to be invested for the most part for a long time. So, I think if we can do that kind of gradation where it can help people to compartmentalize a little the mental games we play, sometimes that can be helpful. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And
I guess to answer your question, I would say,
maybe,
yeah,
yeah,
it depends.
it does depend.
It comes down to that temperament question. Can they really tolerate? Do they really have an understanding of how this works? And will they be willing to, wait out those difficult times?
And it's not a stagnant kind of analysis, meaning
Oh, yeah.
people's risk tolerance in their younger years, this is a generalization and is definitely individual, but generally people's, in their early part, they're willing to take, younger people generally, not just with investing but life, right?
Yeah.
more than willing to take risks when they're younger, and as they get older and start looking at retirement, they start to get focused, and then they're in retirement and getting older. It's normal for someone's risk tolerance to take risks is
Yeah.
declining with age, and when they're not working, they're out of that accumulation stage. One of the biggest fears of retirees is running out of money.
That's very
So
true. Yeah. More so than some of the other things you'd expect, when it
that's
comes to
right.
health and so forth. Yeah.
And whether that's rational, or not, right? Given, I mean, we have clients that have plenty of money that's really not a risk unless, they were just to be silly with their money. But
Yeah.
the way that they live, we have clients that we have to encourage and kind of give permission. It's not real permission, but encouragement to be able to do things and spend and give and whatever their passions are, because of that natural inclination to be so risk adverse, and so that fear of am I going to run out of money. So taking more risk, as this kind of article says, if you take a little bit more risk, maybe you can take more of a withdrawal. It's maybe the general theme of the article,
Yeah.
but it is
I think, it's possible. Again, do you have safety valves? Things that, and a good example might be if you ran out of money, are you debt free but have a residence or more than one residence?
mhm.
Well, if that was the case and you used up your investment resources, you still have a source of wealth that you could draw from.
Right.
Okay, that might, if I could sell my second home, so to speak, or whatever it might be. okay, you could justify saying, I'm going to be willing to take more risk because I have an inherent safety net,
That's
if
right.
you will. Some people, it might be a reverse mortgage on their primary residence, would be another way that they could
Hmm.
envision a safety net. So, but if you still have a pretty sizable mortgage, and maybe, or you don't own a home, well, those are very different scenarios where we got to be more careful not to run out of money.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
So having accurate spending projections in retirement and um, a real understanding of your net worth. So are you taking this money because you want to live a higher lifestyle,
That's a
meaning
really
you want to travel, or you want to buy that boat, or you want to buy that something else that you've always wanted, and that's the money for that, which you could easily cut back? Or are you saying I need more money because I can't afford my basic expenses and my debt
good.
payments, right?
And then that, I mean, yeah, a great example, Jeff. And I think, when you have those varying circumstances, then it becomes a matter of really looking at where are we spending money. Um, do we live in a house that's too large for our available resources, as an
Hmm.
example? Should we consider relocating? We like being here on Cape Cod, but maybe the cost of living is cheaper in, I don't know, South Carolina. I don't know.
Hmm.
Pick a place.
Right.
Um, and so these are kind of the considerations that you can maybe look at and say, well, when I've had conversations with clients where clearly they were saying, "Hey, we're running into we see that there's an erosion happening here. Uh,
Hmm.
what should we do?" I mean, and so understanding your expenses is the first step of that. And most people don't, and that's okay. Most people don't. But as long as you're getting the math to work, it might be fine. But if the math starts being problematic, you really that's the first thing you need to do, is really dig in to understand that. And arguably, everyone should have a better grasp of that so that they don't run into any problems.
Right.
You know, um,
That's
again,
what.
these are all things we do as part of the financial planning process. And, I know we're talking about the 4% rule, but, or the,
Fits
or,
right in.
or the
Fits right into it.
4%
Right.
rule, or whatever it might be. But
Right.
first off, I would be more cautious as to answer that. And secondly, I'd put it in the context of a financial plan.
Absolutely.
Something that's dynamic, takes into account, when we do a financial plan, we take into account not only what are your regular bills, right? People have a sense of what their regular bills are. It's where they spend money that they kind of don't have regularity, that things can fall through the cracks and can add up. And so we try to account for some of those kind of things. What are the expenses that are for renovations, or, car purchases, or, things that maybe a big trip or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And we try to be intentional about, well, what are some of those things in your circumstance? Let's put some numbers to that. Let's add them to this equation. How does this project out really? And then, I might have more money in an IRA, and you might have more money in non-IRA. And well, there's a different consequence when I take a withdrawal than when you take a withdrawal. I might have more tax burden to deal with, and you might have some capital gains, but that's a lesser rate of tax,
Right.
as an example. And so these all become relevant in thinking through how does this all play out. So do a financial plan, I guess, is my
Absolutely.
message.
A-
Get help in that process. Work,
And
work
I
with a
know
financial planner.
we're running short on time, but
Yeah.
one of the most insightful things I think for our clients is that annual review where you
Yeah.
did the financial plan, and that's only the foundation.
Right. Things change.
Keeping track of everything, you set a rule, you set some guidelines, you have spending, and if you're reviewing it every year and
Yeah.
updating your numbers, you're going to see one of two things, one of three things happening. Either you have some more leeway, right?
Hmm.
Or you need to slow down your spending or make some adjustments, some of them that you mentioned, or you're right on course. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's
Right.
either a warning sign or a affirmation or a encouragement sign, right?
Yeah.
Depending on where you're at. And that's as valid to me, and I think for our clients, that the annual review is as valuable as the initial kind of process where we create the financial plan.
Well, I hope if you have needs, you'll reach out to us at amrfinancial.com or 508-771-8900. Work with a fiduciary, whoever you talk to.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to, with that, thanks for being with me, Jeff. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's financial planning, portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at amrfinancial.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901 or send us your questions to radio@amrfinancial.com.